Hey everyone, this is Adam Ellenboss from Nightlight Astrology. Today we're going to take a look at the upcoming solar eclipse that's happening in the sign of Virgo. This is coming up this weekend. I will give you the timeline for this eclipse. I'm going to give you 5 things to watch for today, given the emphasis on the sign of Virgo that is present. We'll talk a little bit about the meaning of a solar eclipse in general, but later this week, I'm going to spend more time talking about what it might mean that we have the combination of the South Node and a solar eclipse happening at the same time. We'll also have some horoscopes with my friend and colleague Ari Moshe Wolf coming up later this week. So today will be a way of sort of exploring 5 things. I'm going to give you 5 things to watch for, given some of the general archetypal themes of Virgo that could be at play. I'm also going to give you the history of the most recent eclipses in the sign of Virgo from both the North Node and the South Node, dating all the way back to 1987, so that you can compare and contrast different periods of your life. I find that kind of tracking really useful, so I'll throw that in there today, in addition to a little deeper exploration of the eclipse in Virgo. So that's our agenda for today. Before we get into it, remember to like and subscribe. It really helps our channel to grow. We're trying to get to 100,000 subscribers on the channel by next summer. Let's see if we can get there. When you give us a little thumbs up at the start of every episode, if you subscribe, if you haven't yet, share a comment, all of that stuff helps. You can find transcripts of any of my daily talks on the website, nightlightastrology.com. When you are over on the website, a couple of things to promote today. First, if you're in Minneapolis on the 20th, Saturday, September 20th, from 6 to 8:30 p.m. at the Grapevine Collective, which is located at the new City Center in Minneapolis. We are hosting an equinox event where we will do a little centering and meditation, a little movement, a little talk on the fall equinox, and some time for community. It's free. Just let us know you're coming by RSVPing on the website. You can find this again under the events, in-person events. We hope to see you there. This will be really nice. Live talks. If you go to the live talks page, I have a new series that I'm doing called Pairing the Planets. We're starting this month, September 25th, with a talk on Mercury and the planetary pairings of Mercury. This is really, really important. I don't sleep on this series because this is going to give you the philosophical first principles of the planets and teach you how to combine them so that you can understand how to create planetary combinations, which is an absolutely essential skill for reading charts, for understanding your own chart. We're going to start with Mercury, but then we're going to move through the other planets over the course of the next year. So you're going to see that in November, we're going to look at Venus, both as a philosophical and archetypal first principle, and then how she blends and combines when she meets other planets in aspect. These, again, are hugely important skills to learn for astrologers. So if you're into astrology, if you also want to understand the pairings of planets in your own chart, check this one out. If you can't attend any of these live webinars that I do month by month, you get the recording afterward anyway. So hope to see some of you there. Of course, our immersive retreat, the Oracle Speaks, or the Oracle Within, I should say, taking place in June of 2026 in Mexico. We have about 30 spots left on the retreat. So, and the early bird rate ends the first week of October. So be sure you check that out. There's a video telling you everything you need to know about the retreat on that page. You can watch it. And in the last thing that I'm promoting, of course, this week, our first year course, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. There's an informational video tagged on to the end of today's content. If you want to learn more about our first year program in Ancient Hellenistic Astrology, it's a 1-year course. It begins again in November with a new cohort of students. Registration is open. The early bird rate is in effect until later on in October now. You can take advantage of that. And there's tuition assistance for all of our programs. So stick around after today's content to learn more about the first year program and everything it includes. Can't wait to study with another group of new astrologers coming in this fall. So on that note, let's turn our attention to the real-time clock, and a lot of things happening this fall. So take me a minute to get through them. Now let's, I'm going to bring up my Epic pen if it will show up. Okay. And what I want to focus on is, first of all, just giving you like a kind of up-to-the-minute astrological update. Mercury is opposing Saturn today. Mercury will then oppose Neptune. Mercury will then trine Uranus, and Mercury will trine Pluto. I spent the first 2 days of this week covering that opposition between Mercury and Saturn and the total sequence of Mercury, which is a vital part of what's happening this week because Mercury is the ruler of our upcoming eclipse in Virgo. So that being said, if you have not yet looked at Monday and Tuesday's content, the coverage of Mercury, which is happening fresh today and tomorrow and Friday, I highly encourage you go back and look at those two videos where we do some really nice coverage of these Mercury aspects, because if you're watching this today, Wednesday, September 17th, that's in the sky right now. It might be really helpful if you haven't seen those to go back and check them out. Because what we're doing today is we're sort of assuming that you've already, taken a look at that content, and we're skipping forward to the end of the week on Sunday, where we will have our solar eclipse. This solar eclipse in Virgo is a major event that we also need to sort of get out in front of, and is going to take our attention for the rest of the week. But as we're looking at the solar eclipse, these powerful aspects from Mercury are coming through right now. And so it's very important, if you haven't yet, again, to just check out that content from Monday and Tuesday on the major sequences of Mercury this week. I did a video yesterday exploring the planetary friendship of Mercury and Saturn, which is kind of a secret that a lot of people feels like a kind of an esoteric little secret in astrology that not a lot of people know about. So that may also be important for us today as we're experiencing a Mercury-Saturn opposition in the sky. So go back and check that one out, especially if you want to learn more about the very interesting affinities that Mercury and Saturn share with one another. Okay, well, anyway, on that note, I want to give you 5 things to watch for given this solar eclipse in the sign of Virgo. These are thematic, these are archetypal, and they are unique to a solar eclipse, which is a very powerful version of a new moon in the sign of Virgo. But before we do that, I want to give you some tips for tracking the history of eclipses in the sign of Virgo, because one of the things that can be a tremendous benefit to you right now in trying to understand what this eclipse might mean in your life, how it might be showing up as a powerful symbol, is to look back on the previous times that eclipses have occurred in the same place of the zodiac, the sign of Virgo. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you back in time and just give you some basic tips for tracking. Always, the house position is going to matter the most, which means that, in a whole sign house format, you want to get a feel for what whole sign house Virgo occupies. Once you know that, then you can you're really cooking with fire, because you know what themes and topics to consider. Alongside of, say, the themes we're going to cover today, you can think about the house topics and then really get a feel for how previous time periods may be connected thematically to what's happening now, or what will happen in the months to come as the sort of effects of the solar eclipse in our life play out. Okay, so what I want to do is let's go back to the most recent eclipses. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to eliminate everything from our perspective except for the nodes of the moon. We're going to take them back in time, and we're going to go to, here we go. So here the nodes of the moon are changing signs in October of 2015. In October of 2015, the north node of the moon moved into the sign of Virgo. That's the part we want to track. The nodes of the moon move always backward through the zodiac, or retrograde, and you can measure their movements by either what's called the mean node or the true node. In what follows, I'm using the mean node. I don't think it's a huge difference. Some people will, die on a hill over it, not me. But anyhow, when we look at, I'm going to advance this now month at a time, we're seeing that eclipses are forming between October of 2015 and all the way until the nodes leave the signs of Virgo and Pisces. That takes us to April of 2017. So during that period of time, North Node was in Virgo. Now, let me just give you a brief example. You guys know one of the ways I like to show you is just by something super, super simple, like let's just take this back. And I'm a Taurus rising. So if I wanted to track that period between October of 2015 to April of 2017, when the North Node was in the sign of Virgo, that means similar eclipses. The North Node, South Node distinction, I'm going to take a look at that with you guys on Friday of this week. But that North Node, South Node distinction makes some difference, but largely you can just think, okay, the last time I had eclipses in Virgo was during this period. This house, the same topics are being activated now that were then. So for me, as a Taurus rising, that's my 5th house, a place, among other things, connected to childbirth and pregnancy. Also, topics like creativity. It's really interesting, actually, the history and background of why this house is connected to creativity. I won't get into that right now, but fascinating. Part of what I looked at during my masterclass series this past year of 2025. Anyway, so between October 2015 and April 2017, while there were North Node eclipses taking place in the 5th house, I became a parent. My wife gave birth to our daughter, who turned out to be a Virgo rising. I thought that was kind of fun. But these eclipses in my 5th house coincided with a period of time in which the eclipses mostly pertained to the birth of a child and becoming a parent. Very appropriate for the 5th house. Now, my point in doing this is to say, look at that whole sign house of Virgo between October 2015 and April 2017 for the last period of time in which you're likely to see some major life changes, changes of direction, changes of circumstance, events and themes that will pertain to the topics of that house and the themes of Virgo. Now, for the themes of Virgo, again, just hold tight. I'm going to give you 5 things to watch for, and then you could actually pair some of those themes within this house. But yeah, so that's an example from my own life. So consider that first period, October 2015 to April 2017. Now let's go back to the previous period, which is going to take us back in time. They move in about 9 to 18 year cycles through the same signs. 18 years for the North Node, let's say, to come all the way back around to the same sign, or the South Node to come back around to the same sign. And half of that length, about 9 years, for them to come back, but in flipped order, the North Node versus the South Node. So that's called a flip nodal return, happens every 9 years. We're going to go back now all the way to 2006. And I'm going to just advance this to the month of June. In the month of June 2006, the nodes moved into Pisces and Virgo, with the South Node now in the sign of Virgo. So now the South Node of the Moon would have then spent all the way until January of 2008 in this space, that 5th house. In my chart, that's the 5th, but whatever chart or whatever house it was in your chart. So during that time, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put Taurus rising up so I can just show you how I did this exercise for myself. What was taking place for me between June of 2006 and January of 2008, while the South Node of the Moon was in the 5th house in my chart, a place at, during this time where we have creativity, right? And things like children, childbirth, and so forth. Well, I wasn't having a child back then. But I was during these 2 years, I went to graduate school and did a Master of Fine Arts in creative writing. And during this time was processing and writing about the path to sobriety that had come into my life through ayahuasca. And so very South Node in Virgo in the 5th, I was writing creatively about process of purification, which is very Virgo. That creative project would eventually become a published book. And so the South Node in that 5th house was, during those 2 years for me, coincided with art school. So again, go back to June of 2006 to January of 2008. Consider the whole sign house topics of Virgo in your birth chart and pair that with some of the themes we're going to talk about in a minute from the sign of Virgo. And now again, you're cooking. You can really think about the connections between those themes, those topics, those timelines, and what might be happening right now. All right, we're going to go back once more. This is getting older, and so depending on your age, this may or may not be effective. I found that the younger you get, sometimes the harder it is to notice these things, and you may end up feeling like the best and only way to notice them is through maybe what was happening in your family or in the kind of the bigger world around you, because it's sometimes harder to remember exactly what was happening for us psychologically or to make connections to some of the houses when you're just a kid might be harder. But anyway, some of you watching may have been born, like me, if you're in your 40s or even if you're older, then this is going to be taking place when you were a little bit older. And so there's probably things you can remember. But anyway, the North Node was back in Virgo from February of 1997. And it was very late February of 97. But either way, late February 97, all the way to September of 1998. So we're going to move this to September of 98. Okay. So it was, again, like the exact transition. I didn't put the exact dates, but it's about the middle of September 98 that the nodes move signs. So late February to mid-September, 97 to 98. That was another period of time in which the North Node was in the sign of Virgo. So I find that to be pretty interesting. Again, like when I look at my own chart now, I was in high school. And so for me, I can't say that the world's most, it was not like I wouldn't say, I can't recall that period as clearly, let's say, as I can the last two that I showed. But one thing that was happening during this time was that at the outset of this period, I had won a creative writing award in my school and was developing a journaling practice, and creative writing was basically becoming a thing for me as a very daily kind of artistic practice. And I also, during this time, was pretty deeply immersed in playing my guitar and taking musical lessons. So when I look back at this period of my life, there were a lot of things happening, but one of the most critical things that was happening was I was writing poetry and journaling pretty much every single day. And that practice of daily writing, even though it was not yet short stories or memoir, the forms that I would come to love later, it was journaling and it was poetry, and writing some music and playing a lot of guitar. But this period was absolutely dense with that kind of activity for the first time in my life. That was another North Node period in my fifth. So take a look at this period between February of 97 to September of 98. If you can remember it, what was going on and how does it correlate with the topics of the house? All right, I've got one more period for you guys. And this one, the South Node was in Virgo. Notice how they're alternating every 9 years. We're going to go back to 1987. And I'm going to push this ahead just slightly. November of 1987, the nodes entered Pisces and Virgo again, with the South Node of the moon in the sign of Virgo. Now, as those eclipses occurred, we were taken through a couple of years. So they end up leaving Virgo and Pisces in May of 1989. Here they are. It's like late May of 1989. So now, for me, what's really interesting about this is, okay, so this, for me, is the youngest period that I can remember. And I was born in 81, right? So I was, 6 to 8 years old, around roughly 6 to 8 years old. So between 6 and 8 years old, the only thing that I could remember that was really significant that happened during this period of time was I switched schools and my family moved. And I like, there's literally nothing else I can really remember so much other than all of my childhood playmates were suddenly gone. We moved, I was going into second grade. So I had built some friends in kindergarten and first grade, those 2 years. And then we moved and I didn't have any friends. And even as a very small child, I remember starting to deal with social anxiety. In the second grade, being a new kid, might sound cheesy, but to me, that's interesting because the Virgo fifth house themes sometimes have to do with things like pleasure and happiness. And this period of time for me was one of a major social adjustment that involved a lot of social anxiety. I don't know if that is the cleanest way of reading what was happening at that time. There may be other things that were happening that I can't remember. But certainly to me, those were the things that stood out. So check it. If you were around and you were a little bit older, it might hit or resonate a little bit more. November of 1987 to May of 1989. Okay, so again, to me, the reason that it's so helpful to do that is you can see when periods are recurring cyclically and topics and themes are coming back up, that there's a weave happening throughout our lives. And I like the image of, I think it might have been Ken Wilber, sort of like a spiral staircase that you're moving up. And as you grow and learn and evolve spiritually, let's hope, you come around to a place in the spiral staircase where 3 levels down, you can see where you were in previous parts of your life. And the idea is that we're learning and growing, but we often come back around to the same things with a little bit more awareness, or maybe a little bit more virtue or creativity or openness. I don't know. So anyway, I hope that's useful for you. What I want to give you now are 5 things to watch for, given that we have a solar eclipse in Virgo. And again, I'm going to talk more about the pairing of the nature of a solar eclipse with the South Node at the end of this week. Today, I just want to give you themes that are related to Virgo and what it might mean that just very basically, a solar eclipse tends to be about the starting points of new cycles, as opposed to lunar eclipses, which are often about the fruition or the closure or resolution of things, the fruiting of a karmic cycle that has history, as opposed to the planting of the seeds of a new cycle, which are more common for a solar eclipse. So what themes might we see from this moment, not just this linear moment, but this moment in time moving forward, spreading out throughout the months and years to come, knowing that these also carry 9 and 18-year cyclical dynamics with them. They're very long, powerful cycles that get started around these points. So here are the things to watch for. With the sign of Virgo, always we have themes surrounding the topic of purification and forgiveness. Virgo, the harvest maiden, is an image that speaks to something pure, something chaste, something virginal. In a way, it's something untouched by the darkness or impermanence of earth. You can't ever really lose your innocence. You never really lose the child within. You never really lose the feeling of being a beginner. How many traditions have spoken to the importance of beginner's mind? How many therapeutic moments or experiences do we have where we say, well, I had some trauma in my childhood, but the child is still there. It's still with me. So the sign of Virgo, because it sits on the cusp of the autumn equinox and the entrance into the dark half of the solar year, symbolically, there is so much that has to do with how we retain or carry that light, even though we move into darkness. You're a spirit soul. You come into the world, you take on a body. How do you retain that sense of the purity of your very being and consciousness, despite knowing you're going to live a mortal life? You're going to experience the interplay of light and dark, morally and physically. So this sign has so much to do with the retainment of something pure. And you can think about that in so many different ways, again, like a child or beginner's mind or the spirit versus matter. There's all these distinctions. And therefore, one of the things that's quite common for eclipse cycles in Virgo is there's like a need in us when we get lost or entangled to come back to something original, pure, innocent, wholesome. And Virgo will say, yeah, let's get back to something whole and pure and good and sweet and innocent. In order to get there, quite frequently, we have to allow for, tolerate, forgive, and accept that in this world things fall short. But it's again, it's like that therapeutic insight. Oh, the child went through difficulties, but that sweet innocent child is still in me. It never went anywhere. And we often get there by, rather than thinking, oh, I lost something, it got messed up. We go through a process of healing and forgiveness, and we find that it was always there. It never left. So themes of needing to experience or find purification, getting back to something pure and whole, but needing forgiveness and tolerance and compassion and acceptance to get there. Those are dichotomies that come up frequently in this sign. Number 2, we have such powerful themes in Virgo related to children or childhood and the initiation into adulthood. The young girl sits at the cusp of the entrance into the underworld, and there's a natural story that the zodiac tells about the alternation of light and dark. There's nothing wrong or bad or evil or out of place about the existence of darkness, about the fall of the sun in autumn, about the death of the light in winter, or about the eventual reemergence of light in the spring. That cycle and that story is sacred for ancient mystics. And yet there is a part of us that has to go through the process of descending out of childhood, out of innocence. And we have to be initiated into the darker realities: impermanence, death, loss of innocence, darkness, evil, immorality. We have to be exposed to it somehow. It's a part of life. And it's often in my experience anyway, working with ayahuasca, the insight was almost immediate that, oh gosh, there are traditions all over the planet that have created meaningful rituals of initiation to expose safely and meaningfully the young psyche to the larger cosmos and the play of light and dark and the initiation into the mysteries and these kinds of things. And isn't it sad that, like, in our culture, I think, for example, of, gun violence in schools, and what a horrific and unguided and thoughtless and sort of meaningless form of initiation into the darker realities of life that children are experiencing. When I was a kid, it was a tornado drill. My kids have active shooter drills at school. And I know this is it's a big topic. But the point is that this sign will often bring up, whether you're an adult or a kid, it will often bring up the images of childhood and innocence, and the innocence lost and the innocence retained, and the need for initiation. How do you retain that inner child while becoming an adult? Those kinds of juxtapositions are really powerful. But so too are just anything in Virgo can, broadly speaking, bring up the theme of children and their innocence. The theme of whether it's sweatshops or trafficking young people, some of those very heavy, dark things will often come up when the nodes are in Virgo, as like collective topics of darkness to be explored around children. The exploitation of children, often connected to the shadows of not being lovingly in touch with the inner child. That, when we are motherless, when we're childless, when we, what I'm talking about, not being in touch with those things in ourselves, we can then, the need for those things can become like shadows. So the themes of childhood become can be quite complex with the sign of Virgo. All right. Number 3, improvement and criticism. Uh, Virgo's psychological characteristic, of complaint or criticism or meticulousness or puritanical perfectionistic, these are well known. Everyone, there's like certain stereotypes of the signs when they appear as psychological traits that we all know. But this sign also speaks to the reality in the solar year of the process of death and judgment and karma and reincarnation and the evaluation of our actions and the results that come from them, how things are judged and weighed in the karmic ledger books or in the scope of karmic law. And one way that this sign has of keeping us aware of the fact that we live in, at least partially, at least in some part, a moral universe. That doesn't, trust me when I say that that's not the whole picture, right? There's something going on that is certainly bigger than what we tend to be able to grasp rationally and morally. But there is a moral dimension to reality. And insofar as there is any room for improvement of character, improvement of personal defects, Virgo is a sign that, when eclipses occur in Virgo, there's often a strong theme of like, you can get better as a person, or you can get healthier, or you can get cleaner, or you can get sober, or you can get better at a skill. You can become a better public speaker, just getting better at things and saying that there's some sense that morally I can get better, but also in a skill, if I put in the practice and effort and work, I can get better. So that beginner's mind, in that sense that I've never arrived anywhere, I can always improve, the humility required to keep developing in a skill, and the sense that I haven't arrived, I'm still a work in process, a work in progress, and I'm not going to take offense to the idea that I'm imperfect. I'm not going to become a perfectionist. I'm just going to do my best to get better. That simple quality of improvement and being able to constructively, caringly criticize ourselves, our efforts, our skills. A good coach, a good teacher should say, good work, and here's what you can work on. Here's some constructive feedback. So these are themes that often come up in the sign of Virgo. Here's how you improve something. Here's how you edit. Here's how you refine yourself, your lifestyle, your habits, your health, your digestion, whatever. It does not stop there. The next one on my list would be themes of sacred anxiety. Just broadly speaking, the sign tends to bring up within us a careful exploration of what is a healthy level of anxiety or concern or care, and what is unhealthy. Now, what I want to say is that anyone who thinks that anxiety of any kind whatsoever is bad really hasn't studied our great mystical traditions well enough or deeply enough, because all of them tell us that there are forms of anxiety that are very important. Let's call it that sacred anxiety that exists in the space of like a performance. Like, when I was a kid, I had to do piano recitals. Do you guys remember those? Did you ever have to do those? And I didn't love the anxiety that I felt getting up to perform. I was in theater and I had to act in front of people, and there was anxiety. And that anxiety in the moment of a creative act, sacred, it's so beautiful. And the feeling of channeling that anxiety and finding a way of directing it into a creative act, like a piano recital or whatever. Now, let's give a flip example. Anxiety may not be constructive when, I've seen a lot of Virgo clients over the days who had eating disorders. And actually, there's a lot of Virgo clients I've had over the years who were like, dancers or in ballet or something. And the amount of control and purity and perfection and fear of failure was absolutely corrosive and terrible, and might have led to eating disorders. You think of that movie, Black Swan. If you ever saw that one, it's like the stress, the anxiety can be debilitating and toxic. So it's not that all anxiety is sacred. It's that there's how do we acknowledge and make room for the sacred creative tension, the anxiousness that comes with things like getting better at something or gaining more confidence or doing things that are difficult, but doing them anyway, even if we experience anxiety, because that helps us grow. See, like in childhood, there's a lot of vulnerability. Like I think about my daughter, the Virgo rising, when she was there's a farm not far from us that gives like little horseback lessons, so we took her there for like a summer camp, but she had to learn how to ride a horse. It was so scary for her, but facing that fear and channeling it and learning to ride a horse and learning to love horses and feel safe around them and know how to move around them, that kind of anxiety it's part of growing up, right? It's part of the child in us is very vulnerable and innocent, and there's a kind of the vulnerability, the fragility, the youthfulness. There's a fearfulness in that of like, am I protected? Am I safe? And to kind of hold that tension and move through spaces of having to get better, having to face fears, having to improve, having to face criticism, and dealing with it and meeting that challenge is a part of how the sacred anxiety of Virgo often allows us to have greater grace, greater acceptance, less kind of control, like a problematic, like try to be so controlled about everything. There's a flow that comes in when we have to face anxiety and sort of let it move through us. So Virgo often about just that. And also very clearly looking at what's unhealthy fear or anxiety. Mercury ruled earth sign that can look at things and get really scared. If I don't do this correctly, I'm going to be judged, or I'm going to fail, or I'm going to, there's a difference between that and someone like, let's say there's a lot of people that I'm watching this as a parent, and I'm like, this is crazy. There are people who have their kids doing things that are highly competitive, and they're basically like, okay, well, what are you're putting your kids in training for professional sports at age 5? You know what I mean? And the amount of pressure that comes with that, and the way that you can see that just stripping a kid of their childhood because they're forced to just dance and dance and dance or perform their violin or whatever, and they don't get to just be a kid. So, there's this there's a real tension in the sign of Virgo between that and then like, your piano recital, it's anxious, but look how great you felt because you did it and you played it well and you made a mistake, but who cares? It all sounded great. That's a rite of passage. The other thing is not letting something in us be free. And you can feel the tension then between childlike freedom and innocence and exploration and moving through rites of passage in meaningful ways, and then like trying to perfect and hold on in ways that are terrible. All right, number 5 would be repression, morality, and grace. So broadly speaking, another way of looking at the same tension that I've been talking about throughout the first points in my list here is that there's like a letter of the law and there's a level of the law that has to do with checks and balances, effort and payoff. Like if you work hard, you get something good. If you act good, you get a good result. If you don't act good, you get a bad result. If you don't practice, you don't get good. And there's a very like clear, logical, and almost moral way that things are judged, evaluated, that things progress and develop or get stunted. And Virgo is very aware of all of the logical ways in which things like effort, work, and practice develop success, or control of details leads to a good result, or moral behavior leads to safety or success, right? But then there's this other side, and this can also be represented in some ways by by Pisces, the opposite sign, sign of Jupiter, exaltation of Venus. And some of this even carries over into the comparison I've done recently on the channel with the Shawshank Redemption and the sign of Libra and Pisces. There's a lot in common that Virgo has with Libra. Those two signs are contra-antitia to one another.
But anyhow, there is some other form of there's another operating intelligence that's co-present with the sort of moral logical. Let's call it moral and let's call it logical. Again, like if I practice, I get a good result. If I do a good thing, I get a good result. If I do a bad thing, I get a bad result, etc. Like that's the sort, let's call it the moral logical way that the law of the universe works. But there's this other thing called grace. And the grace is like you make a mistake, but there was no other way to learn and grow than to make a mistake. And that, in a way, it sort of contradicts the logical nature of things. Well, if I do good, I get good. Well, sometimes if you mess up, you get good, you know, and that's sort of the opposite. Or another way of thinking about it is that it's the interplay of light and dark in a more holistic sense that leads to the soul developing and learning and growing, which is why grace, forgiveness, compassion, and tolerance becomes so important. And at a certain point, the only way to learn is to learn by encountering the shadows of trying to be so good. It's like that Mary Oliver poem, Wild Geese. You ever heard that poem before? I've read it on the channel before. You don't have to be good. You don't have to crawl on your hands and knees across the desert, you know, weeping and gnashing and asking for forgiveness. Just let the soft animal nature of your body, you know, love what it loves. And so there's something that goes beyond morality, even in a universe that expresses the categories of morality to us very clearly. There's something that goes beyond, like failure is often our greatest success. Shadow is often inseparable from light, right? These paradoxes are so important. I would say, like, honestly, my Virgo rising daughter, her hardest thing is understanding things where like two things have to be true at once, and there's something a little bit paradoxical. It's just hard. It's hard for an earthy Mercury sign. So there is some larger container of grace where things move and evolve and develop through a play of light and dark, failure and success, effort and, you know, surrendering effort. Sometimes the times when you go, I quit, I give up, I can't do this, suddenly you've made the most progress, far more than had you kept pounding away, practicing at something, hoping it would develop. No, it's the moment of surrender and giving up that suddenly allows you to take this quantum leap forward in your practice or development of a craft or a skill or an ability. When you surrender mentally and intellectually, suddenly understanding comes. So there's something about these Virgo cycles that brings this tension up of the things you can control and understand in the universe, in yourself, in how things work and develop and grow and are rewarded or punished, and some other kind of law that doesn't play by those logical rules. This is, you know, like one of the famous examples of this from the New Testament and the, you know, often cited in the Christian tradition is that there's the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. Or there's like, you know, it's good for you to follow all the rules, but also, do you have a living, vibrant relationship with the spirit itself, which often strangely doesn't play by the rules, may even ignore them at times, like doing a healing on the Sabbath or, you know, whatever. You get the idea. So all of these dichotomies have been explored as archetypes and themes in every tradition I've ever studied: Hermeticism, Taoism, Buddhism, yoga philosophy, even I would say mystical Christianity. So they're with us. I hope that this exploration of 5 things to watch for and the previous periods of Virgo eclipses give you a lot to work with. We're going to do some horoscopes with my friend Ari. I think that'll be tomorrow. And then Friday, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what it might mean that we have a solar eclipse paired with the South Node, because that's a little extra angle that I think will be useful to cover. So I thought we would do that separately, break it up a little bit. After I sign off right now, there is an informational video about the Year 1 program. Our next course, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, the first year course in Hellenistic Astrology, begins in November. Early bird rates are now open and in effect through most of October. There's need-based tuition, a sliding scale you can work with. So stick around to learn more about that next, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around. I'm excited to tell you about our upcoming program, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. This is our first year course in Hellenistic astrology, and it begins again this November. In this video, I'm going to tell you about the course, the format of the course, and how to register. So let's go ahead and get into it. What is this course about? Well, if you are not familiar, ancient Hellenistic astrology is the earliest and original form of horoscopic astrology. All of the subsequent forms and schools of astrology that have existed over thousands of years come from these philosophical and theoretical roots. And so what you're doing when you study Hellenistic astrology is you're going back to understand the why behind absolutely everything. Why were there ever such a thing as houses and signs in the first place? How were the planets ever assigned to rule various portions of the zodiac in the first place? How do you use the categories of essential dignity, and why were they ever created in the first place? If you're someone like me, you like to know the why behind things, because once you understand the why, then you know how to use things more intuitively. So really the point of Hellenistic astrology, in my opinion, is not so much about going back and becoming a traditional astrologer or just being traditional for the sake of being traditional, as much as it is about grasping the roots of the entire system and paradigm. When you understand those roots, you have more intuition and understanding, which allow for you to be much more artful and fluid in the way that you speak the language of astrology. We call this class Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic because while it is about going back to understand the philosophical, theoretical, technical roots of the tradition, it's also about fluidly bridging those things with modern astrology and all of its most unique contributions. For example, modern astrology has given us so much psychological depth and personal depth. And so in a modern astrological setting, you're going to get the ability to explore your own character, your own psychology, and you're going to be able to utilize astrology for a process of healing and personal transformation. But when you pair that with ancient astrology, and it's almost like predictive karmic analytics, you really have a full toolkit to work with. And so that's also a great mission of ours at Nightlight, is to bridge ancient and modern forms, which is why we call the program Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. So that's just a little kind of overview of the program. If you want to know more about the specifics of the curriculum and of the syllabus, what I encourage you to do is go over to nightlightastrology.com, click on the courses page, go to the first year course, scroll down, and you'll see this over 12 months you'll learn about. And here you're going to see more of a detailed breakdown of the curriculum itself. I can promise you that if you've studied astrology in modern context, but you've never gone back to the ancient roots, while some of these topics may look familiar to you and you go, oh, I've already learned about that. Unless you've studied them from the Hellenistic perspective, I guarantee that you are not going to be familiar with this content. Hellenistic astrology is mind-blowingly new and interesting for most people. And if you've never studied it, again, don't assume that anything on this list is something you're going to be familiar with. In that way, the program is really ideal for a variety of different people, and I'll say more about that in a second. So what is the format of the course? Let's go to that next. Scroll down and you're going to see that the course includes 30 online webinars that I lead throughout the year. Over the course of a year together, I have 30 classes that are broken into different units of material. In between those classes, we have breakout study sessions with your course director and 2 TAs. They're going to lead you through Q&A sessions and tutoring sessions to make sure that you have a lot of support in between major units of study. In addition, we also have an interactive group forum discussion where you can ask questions year-round and get an answer within a business day in the student forum, where a lot of people also connect and build community. Lots of people in that forum also develop like little meetup groups outside of class. That's very common in all of our programs. It's a very community-loving, warm space where anyone's also welcome. Throughout the course, you're also going to find that for every lesson, if you're just there as a hobby student, you can just listen to the webinars. They're all recorded for you. So if you can't make the live webinars, everything is housed on the website as recordings. I'd say about 40 or 50% of our students are going to be following along at their own pace, whereas the other half might be attending the live webinars. But it's really kind of, if you can attend a few and then 1 week you got to be gone, the recordings are always there. You have lifetime access to everything in the course, so it's not a big deal. For every lesson as well, if you're someone who wants to go really, really deep, maybe you have the intention to practice professionally, this course is set up with an optional certification exam at the end from our school, from our program. So you can, if you want to build that resume and develop the credentials from our programs, you can do that, but it's optional, so you don't have to. And outside of every lesson, we have recommended reading. We have supplemental bonus content, all of which is optional, but it's there for people who might want a lot more, whereas some people will take the webinars themselves, and that'll be plenty. So it's really flexible in that way. Also, this is one program within 4 years of curriculum that are meant to go together. And so most people who come through our first year program will end up taking our second year program, where we develop forecasting and prediction and transit tracking techniques. Our third year program, which is aimed at counseling and psychology. So psychological counseling skills is our third year program. And then the Oracle Within, which is our exploration of the philosophical, spiritual roots of the divinatory oracular tradition of astrology. So there's a lot of material there. We also have another 1-year program in horary astrology for some people who want to add that predictive tool to their toolkit. So there's just a lot of material at Nightlight that this class is actually just one part of, which can be taken standalone, or for some people, they get into it, they're going to love it. You're going to hang out with us for 3 or 4 years worth of content. This program is ideal for a number of different types of students of astrology. I'll say that for starters. So let's see here. I'll stop sharing this. So we have there's a profile of the typical students who come through our courses. One is going to be people who just want a very guided introduction to ancient astrology because you've never had it before. Maybe you're only familiar with modern, and you want that guided, structured approach to learning traditional for the first time. Also, people who are brand new to astrology in general, there's no better place to start than at the roots of the ancient foundations. So whether you're a total beginner or just a beginner to Hellenistic, this is a great place to start. If you are someone who's been around astrology for a long time, but you've never had a guided, structured approach to Hellenistic astrology, again, this is a great place to start. I promise you, Hellenistic is very different than what you're familiar with, and you're going to need a guided and structured approach at some point in time. I also think for people who are looking for a lineage, which means not just a bunch of information, but a practitioner-specific based approach where you get to see a practitioner work with clients. You get to hear how a practitioner has prioritized different techniques and why. You're going to get a structured, spiritually grounded focus at Nightlight as well, where if you're looking for someone who practices astrology, but also values grounded everyday spiritual practice, that's Nightlight. If you want a community that's been in the industry for a long time now, this is our 16th year of teaching programs and guiding students through trainings. So all of those things, if they matter to you, this is a great place to study. It's a warm community atmosphere. It's spiritually grounded. It's focused. It's academically rigorous. It's going to provide you the appropriate preparation for practicing professionally, especially if you go through all of our programs. But also for those who are just curious and love astrology for your own personal interests, this is going to be a great place for you to learn and grow and thrive and feel like you have a lot of support around you in the curriculum, the teachers, the community, as you're developing, what might just be a personal interest or spiritual hobby. So that is who it's ideal for. Finally, how you register. You go over to the website. I'm going to take you back there. And it's at the bottom of the first year page. You're going to find that the early bird rate is in effect until October 24th. You can save significantly off the cost of the course when you use the early bird rate, where you can pay in full, or use an early bird installment rate plan. Both are going to save you off significantly off the cost of the course. But also at Nightlight, it has always been our mission to make sure that astrological education is accessible for everyone. So please, if you are someone who would love to take this course, but maybe you can only afford a small amount of tuition per month, use the tuition assistance. It is there. All you got to do is apply. You fill out the little form. You tell us your situation. If you're on a fixed income, if you're on a limited income, if you're part-time, if you're in between jobs, if you don't make a lot and you're on that fixed budget, we understand. We don't want people to hurt themselves trying to study something that is spiritual that we feel should be very accessible for everybody. So if you're someone who could use a little help to make this program happen, you know, for whatever reason, maybe you're a single parent or you're on disability or you're retired or you're on a fixed income, whatever the case is, use that tuition assistance. Also, people in other countries who have extreme, you know, what is it? Exchange rates. We get it. So just use the tuition assistance and we'll be glad to make sure that the price point is accessible. For us, as a spiritual topic, we're a business at the end of the day, but we believe that this is a spiritual topic. And so accessibility has been a part of our model for 16 years now. We've never not had one of our training programs with affordable sliding scale based prices for people who need it. So please take advantage of that. It's all there for you. I hope to see you in classes soon. And if you have any questions about the program whatsoever, direct them to us at info@nightlightastrology.com. And yeah, I hope to see you all coming up here in November. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.